everyone.
Good morning.
Got some people filtering in here. This is great. I definitely encourage everyone, open up the chat. We love to have participation during the session today. We'll be using the chat as the Q&A as well. So feel free to add any of those questions as they come up throughout the session. But if you want to kick us off, I would love to just know where everyone is joining us from and which organizations you're with. And we'll officially kick off here in just a couple of minutes as we let everyone come in.
Yeah. See here. Got the how's the weather question, right? We had an interesting shift here in St. Louis. It'd be 88 today. So it's always that, what do I do? I've got a sweater on, but probably don't need this today.
I know. I'm ready for sweater weather though. Jill, you've got a fellow.
No, I'm in St. Pete.
Yeah, sweater weather is the thing I miss about being from Michigan this time of year. It's a lot more favorable to the sweater weather than St. Louis's variability.
Colorado's crazy because it's 90 here today, but I'm headed up to Breckenridge this weekend where it's only supposed to be in like the low 50s. It's like, we might get some snow. You never know.
Beautiful time of year to be in Colorado.
Yes, it is.
Here in Florida, we get maybe 1 or 2 months of somewhat sweater weather.
You have to force it, right? If you really want it. Like, I'm going to make it a sweater today.
Actually, it's pretty much anytime you go inside anywhere, it's sweater weather in because everyone's AC is hiked so high.
That is very true. All right, well, we're about 3 minutes past the hour, so we are going to go ahead and officially get started. Thank you all for joining us today for our Engagedly Success Lab on building a goal strategy that delivers results. Goals is important to any organization, but it's certainly a critical component of what we do here at Engagedly. And so we want to take this opportunity to host a session and talk about all of that with all of you. Let's meet who you're going to be hearing from today. I'm Amy Jenkins. I'm the Director of Client Experience here at Engagedly. I have been in the HR technology space for around almost 7 years now, which feels crazy to me. And prior to that, lived in kind of an HR and internal communications world at Chipotle. So I'm super passionate about talking about how we use technology and strategies to build a better employee experience and keep that focus around the employee experience. And I will be your host of our session. Very pleased to present to you Jill Kennedy, who is our Engagedly account manager, and I will let Jill introduce herself.
Hello, Jill Kennedy. I've been with Engagedly for about 1.5 years as an account manager. Prior to that, been an account manager for a while. So really like building strong relationships with my clients and helping them get better outcomes. And I'll be walking you through the Engagedly platform as we discuss some of these strategies. So I'll pass it over to Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. So Aaron Adams, today would be a few things, but historically I've played in roles deep in HR from a talent management and assessment standpoint, all the way to performance management. And even in the early days, I worked with Engagedly. So very thankful today to be talking with everybody here on the call and working with Jill and Amy in this presentation as we look to chat with each of you. My passions, I really like the interest piece. They always change, but IO is pretty core to what I like to do and what I like to get involved in. And then ultimately really just helping companies, organizations, individuals just deliver meaningful outcomes. And those could be from a system standpoint, an individual standpoint. For me, it really is just, to Amy's point, around just really setting people up for success. And how do we do that as practitioners, as consultants, as internal partners. And so I'll be a voiceover today as we share the practical side of things. And I think Engagely does a great job of marrying the practice of what's possible to what you actually can do and operationalize within a tool. So look forward to discussion. And with that, toss it back to you, Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. We're so lucky to have both Jill and Erin joining us today. A couple housekeeping things before we officially dive into the session. As I stated at the very beginning, we're going to use the webinar chat today for Q&A, for discussion among all of you. We love for people to engage during these sessions. So please feel free to enter any of those questions, or if you just want to share something that your organization is doing really well, or a challenge maybe you want to throw out to the group, go ahead and put it in that chat. We will also open it up to a Q&A at the end, but you certainly do not have to wait for that. As Erin said, this is a discussion. We don't want to talk at you for the next 45 minutes to an hour. So if something's on your mind, go ahead and throw it in the chat and we'll get right to it. But why are we here today? What are we here to talk about? We're here to talk about goal strategy. And I think that one of the things that we see at Engagedly, and I think Erin has probably seen across a lot of the clients that he's worked with in the past, is that people have goals in their organization, but they don't necessarily have a cohesive strategy to back it up. They don't have a clear understanding of how goals really fit into the everyday of the employee experience, and how we weave that throughout everything we do in our organization, ultimately helping us truly understand impact. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. Moving beyond that idea of, yeah, we've got goals, check that box. Everybody completes them or fills them out at the beginning of the year, check that box. But do we follow through on them? Do we create kind of these 3 bullets that we have listed here, which is leading to higher performance, being able to truly track and prove that goals are contributing to the success of the business? Do we create that alignment across our organization with really clear visibility? So it's easy for me to see as an individual that my goal tracks to my department goal, which tracks to my organizational goal. And I can see exactly what it is that I'm contributing to, which is going to help me in all different facets of showing my value to the organization. And maybe even more importantly, feeling that value myself. And then, finally, we're going to talk a little bit about how do we measure that success, right? How do we be able to prove that having a really solid goal structure in place leads us to impact and helps us really show the value? So Erin put that poll up there for us. The question, which part of building a goal setting strategy do you most want help with today? And we will try to gear our conversation toward whichever answer we come to. Getting some good participation there.
We got about a little less than half, so we'll leave it open for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Get some feedback, and as Amy said really well, we'll use this to kind of focus in on some areas. Then even if we don't go super deep into some of the areas we're all very passionate about here on the call, then a follow-up, right? We'll make sure that, after the webinar, that some stuff sent over, so in that way we feel like we're equipped. I think that's what we'll focus on today, is like really getting practical. And that's what I love about what Amy and the team has done with these success labs, is practical. We're going to make it as down to earth as we can and within the reality of what's possible and engagedly too. So it'll be nice discussion today.
Absolutely.
All right, we got some stragglers, a little over 50%. We'll leave it open for another 20 seconds or so. If I had some good Jeopardy music, I would channel my the late great Alex Trebek to do some stuff, but unfortunately I don't. So
Jill or Erin, are you surprised at all to see where some of these answers are coming in?
I think not really. I mean, I think based on some discussions, it kind of aligns with how I would have guessed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I could see it, because I do think that where everybody's kind of focused on is where it is the hardest, because that's the thing that's least out of our control. And so I'll go ahead and end the poll and then share the results with everybody. So we can see from the results that everybody zoomed into the alignment piece for the most part relative to the group. Everybody kind of played on different areas. The cool thing about today is, as we get into this, we're going to talk about each one of these. Each one of these does serve a role as we think about setting up our strategy and being very intentional before we actually get into setting the goals. And I think that's very important for us to think about. It's the setup, right? It's the preparation that we do. It's those steps in there. But Amy, what do you think about some of the responses? What came to mind when you were looking at them?
Yeah, I think it makes sense that alignment is one of the ones that jumps out at us. I do think that that is a challenge, especially with the way a lot of organizations are running goals today. I think it's also interesting that getting the right people in the room didn't show up. And I'm curious as to whether or not people think they're already doing that, or if that's just something that we're not considering as part of that goal strategy too. So I know you're going to talk a little bit more about that. So we'll see if anybody wants to throw those answers into the chat later.
Absolutely. So we'll have some polls throughout today, just a couple of them, but great opportunity for you all to give feedback. As Amy had shared, if you have questions, Amy will be watching the chat as I go through some of this content with you. Feel free to interject and ask your questions. I'll do my best to answer them, and Amy and Jill will as well. And we'll get into the second piece when we actually go inside of the Engagedly tool. So my voiceover here in the beginning is like, let's set some context. Let's get aligned around what is building a good goal strategy, right? Or building a strategy that we can align goals to. So I think this is a good place for us to start conceptually. This is going to be not going to be the most comprehensive piece in the world where I'd say like, this is going to be better than anything you're doing today, but this is going to be a litmus test for you, as well as if you're not doing some of these things today, maybe question, well, maybe you should. So you think about these 6 moves that we talk about here as a good starting point for us to consider. We'll go through the pieces in each of them in more detail when we think about involving the right stakeholders to increase commitment, right? Clarifying our strategy into some of those winning choices that we actually decide to double down on. Talking about the methodology that we pick and some of the things that we would require and some of the trade-offs that happen between the different methodologies that are out there. And then considering how we get to those organizational priorities and then creating line of sight. And then ultimately, how do we bring this into the day-to-day? So it's a cadence we'll go through today, and we'll double click into each one of those areas to really pull back some things that we should consider. I echo the sentiment that Amy shared. I was very surprised when we put the poll out there that nobody said that was the most important thing, because we just assume a lot of times we do this right. So in my past, I worked with a lot of really talented organizational designers. This is something they do really well. So the organizational design field, and this is just borrowing from some of what they do when they get groups together to really think about how they should structure an organization, they're very good about getting the right people in the room. And when we think about building alignment, where we were all very focused on, that actually starts in the beginning. And if we get the right people in the room, naturally we're building alignment early. What we see a lot of organizations falling into the trap of doing is creating these more private groups, or maybe just the top, just the executives, and setting the goals there, and then pushing them out through the organization and expecting that there's really good alignment. Well, one could say if you want more commitment, increase participation, right? That's what this means here. So we talk about inclusion from that context. When we think about the work that's strategic too, that really moves the levers in the business, like what is your competitive advantage, that work and those people that do it, having those people in the room early on who are accountable for some of those strategic levers will go a long way, right? They're going to be easier to connect in, align, do some of the things that downstream that we see as areas that we're like, oh, we just need better alignment. So think about how you're setting it up, right? Get the right people in the room as you're starting these initial goal conversations, not just the executive kind of secret society that some people like to call it. Really think intentionally. And then when you do that, because it's a different group that you may not be working with on a regular basis, do be intentional about setting up the right decision rights. And all that means is as we get to these discussions that we're going to have around the goals and the strategy and linking things up and deciding methodology, whatever we're capturing in those meetings, let's be clear on who's making the final decisions. Sometimes we like to talk about RACI charts. We've got fans of RACI charts. We've got people who don't like them. Doesn't matter. What you need is clarity around who makes the decision so you can move past some of those tough conversations you'll have in the room, knowing that you're going to have people who aren't probably working with each other on a daily basis. So that's the first step to really consider. And I'm a big proponent of getting the right people in there and making it inclusive, because you will get that alignment, or be more likely to get that alignment down the road. So here you're going to notice I don't say define your strategy. You probably already have a strategy, right? You're an organization, you're doing something. So it really becomes let's clarify the strategy. So when we think about clarifying the strategy, it's really about how do we translate from that mission and vision that we have into like a North Star. Now, you don't have to use this methodology, but where I find this really helpful is that North Star creates that central point that is a derivative of that strategy that we all are aligning up to. So even when we get to those organizational priorities, this is where we're talking about those where we play, how we win, those really key choices that are embodied within that North Star. So I think it's very helpful when I work with organizations that they can do that. Not easy to get to that, but it's worth the effort, right? Because when you talk about that alignment piece that we had mentioned earlier, I think that's a good step in there. And then when we think about capabilities, right? Think about some of the capabilities that your organization needs to drive that value or to achieve that North Star. Set up some guardrails, so be very intentional in there, and then make sure that you have some measures before actually even converting them into your OKRs and embedding them. Get some good measures, right? You're leading and lagging indicators there for the business that you're really honed in on. And it's not every metric on their sun, but you want to think of like some of those key, 3 to 5 metrics that really are your business indicators, both from a leading and lagging perspective. And then the guardrails in there, they're like a counterbalance, right? They counter known risks, essentially set some parameters for us and really identify some of the constraints up front. So I know Amy's putting some questions into the chat as we go through. So as we get feedback in, let us know if there's things that you guys are curious about. But here, after we clarify that strategy, it then moves directly into what is that methodology that we're going to use. Now, there's a number of them. So I'm just calling out 2 very common ones that we use, and they're actually related to a degree. So here we often hear people talk about SMART goals versus OKRs versus BHAGs, or there's a lot of different methodologies. What we know is goal setting theory works, right? We have a lot of devices that are built around it. Choosing the right methodology is important to your organization, and there are some trade-offs. So I put this table out there just to give you an idea as a quick snapshot of, when I select this methodology, what am I choosing it for? So a lot of people champion OKRs. They make sense for organizations that are moving fast and high growth. You want to keep a close pulse on things. The trade-off there, though, is if you're not doing things like check-ins today and you move to an OKR methodology, that's going to be a bigger change management scenario, right? There's going to be some more friction based on the way you're working today versus what you're expecting from people tomorrow. So you just want to be very intentional before just saying you're going to do something that you're backing into that in there. So just keep that in mind. And I give these design parameters to you to think about. Because when we're choosing them, it's not just saying like, oh, somebody said so-and-so was doing OKRs, so let's do them. Let's think about where are we at today? Where are we moving from, and where are we looking to go to? And how much should we be planning for just in that alone? Now, there are some, what we'll say, non-negotiables. In the beginning, you saw I was an IO psychologist by classical training. I would say there are things we know about goal setting that's just science, right? Challenging, specific, right? More committed people are, right? More likely they're going to achieve those goals. So just think about it. It is a motivational technique. And again, back to the very beginning, getting the right people in the room will also help you with that commitment, right? So think about participation in that context. So as we think about organizational priorities, everything is a priority, right? I think it's focus here. I think that's the key as we talk about the process that we need to set out for when we do goals. And when we think about the priorities, it's really what are those top 3, 2 or 3. You can always add more at a later point in time. But as human beings, we know that we like to add complexity, but we very often don't remove things from it. So that's an important step in here, not just to say these are the top 3, but in these conversations too, what are we not doing? And that's something, you heard me earlier say organizational designers do certain things really well. I learned a lot from them over the last couple of years. That what we're not doing is very powerful. So not just what we're going to achieve, but we're achieving this means we're not going to be doing this, right? There's a trade-off there. So understanding what that is. Now, when you get into these priorities too, make sure you write those observable results. Who's going to be the owners of that, the metrics that align to it, whether it's baselines or targets. That's one of the things I think Engagely, one of their upcoming webinars is going to talk about. They do a really good job of like these relative measurements, and they're pushing a release here in the coming weeks that I was pretty impressed about as I was preparing with Amy and the team. So I think just the right measurements and making sure the system can accommodate those measurements, I think is very powerful. Limiting the priorities essentially will just save us, right, from over targeting, right? We're trying to do too many things, and we're all misaligned. So alignment happens too, just from the sheer number of things can build out branches that weren't intended. So less is more in this context. You actually hear a lot of the goal setting and OKR methodologies talk about that. Like that's a very core to the DNA of the methodologies that they have is focus. Less is more. Get rid of things. Make the I'm not doing list in there.
Before we keep going, Aaron, I just wanted to touch on, we had a really interesting conversation as we were preparing for this webinar about how having a really aligned goal strategy empowers employees to challenge when they're asked to add additional things to their plate, right? We all feel probably overwhelmed and overworked from time to time. And having that, really aligned goal strategy can help us to say no or ask the question, how does doing that thing help us achieve this? Right? It keeps us all kind of aligned and centered toward that North Star that you talked about earlier.
I love what Amy shared there, and it speaks nicely to when we talk about aligning goals. When the system opens up visibility, and again, I'm not saying visibility to every single goal. Like I'm not talking about performance improvement plans and goals for those, or individual development plans where somebody's just working on something they just want to be better at. Now those might be a little bit more personal between an employee and a manager, but when we talk about building our strategic framework, those should be pretty visible. And to Amy's point, then that and the residual effect of that is that's going to empower employees to say, yeah, I don't really think that's going to get us to where we're going. That's a good conversation. How are we working together to achieve the strategy? A lot of times people who do the work are going to have the solutions to how to solve for some of those things we don't see. And I think that's a big blind spot a lot of times with managers is, when we're assigning goals to people, we're assuming we really understand the intricacies of a lot of this knowledge work, which may not be the case. And I think that opens us up. That visibility opens up more meaningful conversations, your partnership in terms of finding the best solutions, and that from an employee perspective too is just so rewarding, right? Like, hey, I just created a goal that really drove this lever forward that we were trying to do, and nobody saw that solution. So I loved when you shared that, Amy, in our prep, because that was just, I was like, yeah, that's right. That's a good point. It gives employees an opportunity to get in that strategic conversation in a safe space rather than challenging, what's being shared to them or assigned to them. It's really about what we're going for. And I think that's pretty powerful. As we get into this system, it's important that from a practical standpoint, as we think about success, right? We're in a success labs. How can we do this in the system, right? All this sounds good in theory, but the system needs to be able to make sure, can we open up visibility and connections? Can we link up? Right? Because that's when we talk about aligning, it's really making sure we're not constrained by the system. And I think that's one of the things that when we get into the tool and Jill takes us on a tour of some of these things and how they work, that's powerful, right? Your tool needs to be able to support what you're communicating. And I think here that leveraging the ability to link up, ensuring goals are visible through dashboards and other things, that's gonna give a lot of accountability and ultimately to try to unlock some of that potential in your guys' organization. All right, I borrowed this term from a past colleague, the operating rhythms. I love this term, right? Some people have good operating rhythms, some people not so good, some people were setting them in place, but goals then become a really good data point for us to bring in. They make them top of mind. It's like the mental Rolodex, right? With our distracted minds and all the tools we have out there, things go to the back real quick, right? We got short attention spans. We all know all the details behind that. But as we embed them within things like the one-on-one, it's a safe environment to have some very objective and tough conversations because we're talking about the goal. I'm not talking about Aaron. I'm talking about the goal Aaron's working on. So I think that's a really good um, context, right? To bring them into the organization, make them more regular. As we start getting them into more regular, then we start having more formal ways to think about, do we need to move these strategic levers? And ultimately, as we go into these broader conversations that happen on maybe a less frequent cadence, goals still play a central role, right? Because we can all look at, hey, in this monthly connect with the whole entire department, how are we all working together? Great. Bring up the goal chart. We can see into that, have some lenses into what's happening, what's not, where we need to adjust, and then it gives us the ability to close the loop and give feedback inside of those goals too. So I think this is where the system starts to dance and play really well with what we do from a practice standpoint. Like we get our strategy all set up, we start operationalizing, then inside of the tool, the rhythms start to become very natural, right? Because they're things we're doing on a regular basis. So with that, I have given you some context that I've seen over the years, to Amy's point, and working with clients and just learning, right, from others, whether that be organizational designers, HR consultants, or just leaders and webinars that I've attended and books I've read. But I think it's really distilled down into some of these steps that I shared with you all that make it pretty simple for us. And so I think Engagedly does a great job of operationalizing some of that simplicity in terms of, okay, how do we bring these things to life? And so we're going to take a little tour on that. With that, Jill, I'll toss it over to you. And if we have any questions from the group before we go into the demo, feel free to share, but I'll be around and here. And I'm just happy I could share that strategy component with you all.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. All right, so we are going to take a look at how these strategies actually come to life inside Engagedly. So I'll be walking you through our demo site, which is Willy Wonka themed. So yes, we'll be using goals like candy sales, factory efficiency. So it'll be fun, but it'll really show you how these principles can apply at any organization. So I wanted to start just quickly with how easy it is to add a new goal. And goals can be set at the organization, department, business unit, individual level. You can build them from scratch. We also have AI assistance with Marissa, our built-in platform guide. So Marissa can suggest goal titles and even draft measurable key results. So we can edit, change out any of these, delete them altogether if you wanted to get rid of them. And then also we have some best practice templates built in. So you have these templates that you can use, and you also have the ability to create your own internal library to keep goal setting consistent across your organization. All right, let's plug this one in here. Let me go back to this way. All right, add an end date. And then once your goal is created, you can cascade it down, meaning you can push that objective to an entire department or your team in just a couple of clicks. All right, so that makes everything super easy there. And then where it comes really powerful is the alignment. So let's head into the goals module. I'm going to go to our top level goals at the organization level. And so you can see how these top level goals are being supported by individuals, different departments, or business units. So they don't just sit at the top. Every department will be able to see how their work ties directly back to that larger mission. And then you can also see how that is reflected visually. And so these all link together. so you know who's supporting how these goals are going to be accomplished. All right, so talking about that visibility piece, once your goals are set, you don't have to wait until the end of the year to see where everything stands. If we go into the analytics, I'm going to switch to our new version here. And then within productivity, that's where our goals information live. So you have a lot of information, data points that you can look at for the organization, but you can drill down by department, business unit, location, all of that. So here I can look at some different statuses. So if I want to look at goals that are behind, maybe I can click into grow golden ticket sales. And from here, it's behind target. So I can drill down into the details and see where maybe the progress is stalling and even read the discussion thread. So this is where teams can tag each other, share updates, collaborate in real time, all within the goal itself. So you don't have to dig through emails, Slack, or anything like that to find the latest status updates. They all live right there within the goal. All right, so lots of different information, good data points that you can gather from the analytics tab. But the other piece is accountability. So goals within Engagedly can flow into maybe one-on-one conversations or the performance review process. So when progress is made, recognition can be tied directly to those goals. So for example, we've got Oompa Loompa here. He hit one of his targets. So leaders can recognize them in the platform, and then that recognition lives right inside of Engagedly. Other team members can see that and like it, add comments. So keeping that conversation alive, keeping it exciting. And then if you are in your goals, another way you can come to your own goals. And then if you are struggling, you need to talk to your manager about it, you can add it to your meeting. So I can go ahead and select my recurring meeting with my manager to add that to the agenda item. So that'll be top of mind at our next meeting. I won't forget to talk about it. So it's really easy to draw that into those one-on-one meetings. And then also, when it comes time for performance reviews, goals can be pulled directly into your review process. So managers and employees can rate their progress and reflect on specific goals. And that makes the reviews much more objective and connected to actual results.
I think that's a really powerful piece, Jill, that you just touched on, bringing goals into performance specifically, but across all of the functions. I wonder how many people are challenged when they're doing like a performance cycle that you end up in kind of recency bias. Because if you're not tracking some of those objective things, or if you're, everybody's busy again, you're kind of caught up in what's happened over the last couple of weeks, maybe even couple of months, let alone a half a year or a full year. And so I love that our system, and I hope whatever tool you're using gives you that kind of exposure to pull in those targets so that both the employee and the manager can see the full scope of the employee's impact on the organization, and not just those little pictures from what's happened over the course of the most recent experiences for them. So if anybody has any experiences with that, I'd love for you to throw that in the chat as well. But I just want to highlight that, Jill, because I think that's a pretty important piece.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I love what you're sharing on that concept. And look, when you were sharing that earlier, when we were chatting, it just made me think of like the double work too. Like I don't know, like everybody does these goals and like, yeah, but then I got to do those again. And at the quarterly check-in, but the way the system works just kind of brings it right in. It saves so much time. And that's one thing we don't have a lot of, right? Time. And I think that's the time saver piece that you share there. That's why I think about Amy. When you're sharing your example, I just keep saying, yeah, that just saves me so much time. I don't have to do this again, double effort, and then run into some of the biases like you were sharing. So it's super helpful to help on the performance side, especially.
Yeah, for sure. I know that one of our clients, when they rolled out OKRs, they saw a big increase in their employees who said they understood how the work connected to the company strategy. So I think that alignment and transparency is one of the, like, what we're really aiming for within Engagedly. And kind of coming back to what Amy said about being able to push back a little bit, how is this going to help us achieve X? And that also gives the leadership an opportunity to tell them, well, actually, this is how it does.
Mhm.
And so sometimes the dots aren't connected, but you have that opportunity now to say, well, actually, doing this is going to help do this, which will help us get there. So then you can really understand, okay, now I am excited about doing this rather than thinking like this is a pointless goal and it's a waste of my time. So it really brings everything together, and I think will increase productivity and engagement all across your organization by having that alignment.
Absolutely. We have another example of a client recently that was still doing goals in Google Sheets. Probably a few of you on the call are still in that mode. And it's effective from the standpoint of at least they're written down, right? We're tracking them somewhere. But there wasn't that overarching alignment. There wasn't that regular point of checking in and making sure that, we were finding where we were getting stuck, right? So if we weren't achieving that goal, what was getting in our way? We're not having those regular conversations. And transitioning over into Engagedly and having it in our platform improved that experience exponentially. They saw a performance increase for their employees and saw a 10-point increase on employee engagement in their best places to work survey. And they definitely attributed that, partially to at least the fact that employees felt connected. They knew that the work that they were doing added value and had meaning. So powerful points there.
Absolutely. Yeah, so when you're in Engagedly, whether or not you're the org administrator or you're a manager, you really have the ability to see where things are at, and individual contributors as well. So you can see where those top level goals are being met and how they're being supported. So it's really nice to not have to wait until the end of the year to see how things are going, and you have real-time information. Yeah, so really just to wrap it up, setting meaningful goals, cascading them across your organization, tracking that progress in real time can keep your goals alive in everyday conversations through those one-on-ones and recognition and performance reviews. So whether your focus is revenue or efficiency or employee engagement, Engagedly can really help turn the strategy into some meaningful results.
Thank you, Jill. That was fantastic. If anybody again has any question, always reach out to you. I'll also throw into the chat at the end of this an upcoming experience lab where Jeeve, a member of our solutions consultant team, is going to do a deep dive into the new Goals 3.0 and feature and functionality, expanding upon everything that Jill was just talking about. So this Success Lab is not supposed to be a sales pitch, but we definitely want to throw out there that there are those additional resources for our Engagedly clients. And we hope for those of you that aren't Engagedly clients today, you're also getting a sense of the things you should be thinking about as you're moving forward with your goal strategy. And do you have the right tools and resources to help you achieve that? Because that is kind of a critical component there. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But we skipped a poll, right, Aaron? We blew right past it.
Yeah, was too passionately immersed in some of the stuff we were talking about. So yeah. Yeah, so I think we have so we were curious. One of the questions when we were preparing for this, we were just really interested in terms of, we talked about the goal setting methodology, right? And we covered some just examples, but how would you describe yours today? So there's some options in here, but go ahead and select what you think really describes where you're at currently. You guys are fast on the get, feel you. All right, we're almost at 50%.
I know.
Pretty quick.
Yep, getting some good answers.
I like that we got a pretty representative group in terms of in terms of
Mhm.
okay, almost everybody. Very good. All right, we'll give a couple more seconds. We have like 8 seconds.
One more second to get it in.
Yeah. All right.
Now it's when we need the countdown music.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I was surprised about is like well-defined and running smoothly. So based on what we covered here, kind of a question you all who it's well-defined and running smoothly, what is it about your process that you really appreciate as somebody who's either defining goals or checking in and driving progress? So in the chat, I'd be curious what you really are finding valuable from your personal standpoint. Maybe we didn't talk about it here. It's a kind of a yeah, and this relative to what we shared. And similar question to just getting started, folks. If you're just getting started, where are you finding the biggest friction points currently in getting started? And then the planning phases, it's more, are there additional things that we didn't talk about that could be helpful to you? And if you got nothing in place, then we'll be sharing this deck and they'll have this recording just to get kind of getting started to start thinking about the strategy side of it. Because I do think it's a great opportunity if you don't have anything to start with the strategy. And ultimately to making sure you got the tool. If you're already engaged with the client, great. If not, just making sure the tool does align with what you're trying to do in there.
Rebecca says, how about the option in place and needs a little work?
So in place and needs a little work. So I'd think about where's it working well, right? I always kind of start there. Okay, is there parts where the tool is working well, and if it's not working, where is it like that needs a little work? Where's the main friction? So where are we getting the most resistance? Is it not working well because people aren't adopting what we've set out to from a change perspective, or is it the tool itself or what we've that it's just not getting some of the outcomes or driving results that we've set out to?
And
Yeah,
that's kind of what Sherry's touching on there.
yeah, and that's a great point. So we talk about strategy here, and so one thing to think about whatever we're doing, I had mentioned it in a little earlier from to, right? So let's think about the gap. Like where are we going from and where we're starting from and where we're moving to? That's change management, right? Your degree of change that you're acquiring from there. So there, Sherry, I would think about, okay, do we have an approach for managing the change? And there I think about having a structured approach to use it managing the change. Now there's different methodologies out there. Some people love ProSci. I've done some ProSci stuff. Um, but as long as you have a framework, a way to structure people through that takes into consideration the people side of it. Can we move the people, not just the system and practice, but the people along with what they need? And that's a good, I think that's a good place to kind of assess how well we've managed the change from the people side. Um, so Sherry, hopefully when you talk about the adoption, I would look at it from that lens and then start to see where you're getting some resistance or where some of those gaps in terms of some of the things individuals need to drive the change and what you've provided them. Are there some things from a change perspective they're not getting that we maybe need to check off the box and kind of assess? Yeah. The only other thing, Amy, that comes up when Sherry put that comment out there, they need to support tools, motivators. I do think a lot of that's in the change, right? Communicating it, but then having a safe place to do this stuff. And that's one of the things about the system. Does the system give you the ability to like draft them? I believe you guys can actually draft goals and do some of those things in the tool where you're not even like officially like sending them out there, but you have even things like AI and your libraries of goals that you can give them access to, which are just Kickstarters. And I think a lot of times the resources and tools, the systems can help with that, Sherry, too. And I know Jill and Amy were sharing some things with me that they do that I thought were pretty cool, especially like the library of goals. Like, so that way people have starting points that they can refine and build goals off of in there.
Yeah, I think that definitely is a gatekeeper to people engaging with, I mean, certainly technology, but anything that's kind of new, especially if setting goals, if they're not in like a sales or marketing department, they may not be used to setting, very specific measurable goals. And so it can be intimidating to go in there and figure out, how do I write this correctly? What are the correct terms of measurement? So being able to set up that library and have the structure in place. I think that is definitely a helpful starting place. We also use a lot of and recommend automation within the system too, so that it is part of an employee's, journey from their starting time with the organization. They may have goals assigned to them at 60 days, right after they've gone through their initial onboarding. Boom, it's just in there for them so they can see it. It's not something that they have to remember to go out and track. It's already assigned, it's set. So then the manager has to just spend the time leading the employee through their expectations and how they should be utilizing that, how they should be tracking it. So I think that helps a little bit as well.
Yeah, Rebecca made a good point. She talked about department structures being very different and diverse, how sales runs one way, ops may be a bit different, and then admins too. So when we think about the different groups, that's a really good call out. So when we think about, right, what's the non-negotiables? Specific, right? Now we see measurable, you're right, sales is super easy to measure. When I think about measurable, I think of really two things: quantifiable or verifiable, right? So it does not necessarily have to be, can I verify? And then the other piece I throw in there, and the OKR methodology likes to talk about this often, how can we talk about progress? Because that's the other thing when we go into these one-on-ones. If I'm going to use this there, then I should be able to talk about progress. So it really becomes an exercise of breaking it down. And I like, Rebecca, what you shared, do work within departments. If they have specific ways, when we put them into the system, then we can start to look cross-functionally in that alignment piece. How are they aligning up? So when you set your strategy, you have your methodology, but maybe another group, as long as it's specific and we can see and we can track progress and we understand where it's at, then we can strategize on how this needs to move or can be changed. That's what's key. So I think as you have different, one size does not fit all in terms of like maybe a methodology. That's okay as long as we're clear on what they're working on and where it's at, right? Because if it gets stuck and it's a strategic lever, we got to find ways to rally our resources to get it unstuck, right? Because then if our strategy is going to suffer a lot, that could be a very, very tough conversation for the organization to be in, right? Your main competitive advantage lever is getting stuck because we can't quantify what's being done. We need to really work and spend that extra time quantifying it in some way or making it verifiable in there. And so not everybody has to be the same, but as we bring them into the system, just to make sure there's clarity that anybody can look across. And I think that's one of the big challenges I've seen. Imagine everybody sees these goals. And when Jill was doing the demo, I kept envisioning the Engagedly tree structure, right? There's all these goals we can see all over the place. If somebody outside of my department looked at this, would they know what this is? Would they know what I'm working on? And I think that's the level of specificity we should get to, is it's understandable by others. So I think keeping that in mind, but it does take a little extra work, Rebecca, working with those teams and those individual groups in there. For sure.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point from both of you as far as driving adoption. And Rebecca, you're speaking to my internal communicator's heart right there with the targeting and making sure that what you're sharing with your employees is relevant, right? Because if you're sharing something so high level that they can't place it back to their day to day, it becomes really hard for them to go and action off of. So absolutely. And that's why, again, bringing the right people in the room is so critical in that beginning phase, to make sure that as you are creating these goals, there are measurements that every single department can verify as they're coming back through and reporting on their impact.
Absolutely. Yeah. And at least we'll know what
people have the ability to share the input, getting those right people in the room, then they have that ownership, which will build the adoption. So if you kind of just, here's our goals, and it's top down dropping them to you, you don't feel quite as connected to them. Whereas if you are a part of the process, then just adoption is going to be naturally a little higher.
Yeah. The one thing to think about in alignment, Rebecca, that as Amy and Jill were sharing, is there will be interdependencies, right? And that's what, from a system standpoint, we'll see too. So if you're doing it separately in each department because it's unique to the group, that's okay. But when we bring that to everybody, it's really making sure that we're able to call out interdependencies still and have some of those conversations so that we're all focused, very strategically, and we limit the amount of redundancy we might have in there. So I think there's a few things in there, but I know you got some talented practitioners working around you. So continue to engage the teams on how that progresses and additional resources you might need. And I'm sure that Amy and the folks will be able to help you out on some of those things. I like these after, not in the moment questions, but after like reflection thoughts here.
Yes.
Well, I've appreciated, Amy, that you brought me in to be able to talk to some of your Engagedly clients. I spent years ago working with a lot of them. As I see here in some of the conversations, you have some people that are really being thoughtful about how they approach the use of Engagedly, which is a great win for you all. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And with that, I don't know how much time you want to hang around, but I can hang around and answer any other challenge questions or just tell you I'll find the answer to that.
Well, yeah, if there is any last minute questions where we kind of wrap things up, throw them in there. Hopefully you have all of our information too, that you can reach out to us separately if you'd like. We will send the recording and the presentation deck so you can reference back to that. I just put the link to the Experience Lab that's coming up on September 23rd into the chat. So if you want to take a deeper dive into goals, please let us know and join that session. You'll also see that Jill and I have a couple of QR codes on our screen. We are very excited. I can't even tell you how excited I am that we are hosting our first in-person People Plus Strategy Summit for Engagedly. So we are coming together in Nashville, November 4th and 5th. We would love to have you join us. So if you scan that QR code, it will take you to the registration page. There is no charge to attend. We're not charging a registration fee or anything. We want you there. We want to spend time networking, talking about the importance of bringing AI into your HR strategies and culture and how we can humanize that experience, as well as just getting to spend time together, sharing best practices and learning. So definitely take a little shot of that QR code and reach out to us with any questions. When is the recording going to be made available? Within the next couple of days. So we'll download this and then we'll get an email out to everybody that registered and attended the event. Jill, Aaron, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us today and walking everybody through both the demo, Jill, and talking through how the system can help to really synchronize that goal strategy. And then Aaron, as always, your expertise is second to none. And we love having you join us in all capacities.
Absolutely. It was amazing. Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure. The two of you have a good one, and everybody who attended, thank you as well.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.